The morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling financial district as a sleek black Bentley pulled up to the curb. The car door swung open, and out stepped Robert Chen, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the pavement. At 45, Robert was the definition of success, CEO of Chen Investments, with a net worth that made headlines in business magazines. People instinctively moved out of his way as he walked toward his company's skyscraper. His face remained expressionless, eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses despite the early hour. The employees who passed him offered quick, nervous nods which he barely acknowledged. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," his assistant said, rushing to match his pace while juggling his schedule tablet and a cup of coffee prepared exactly how he liked it, black, no sugar. Robert took the coffee without a word of thanks. He never saw the point in unnecessary pleasantries. Time was money, and he had built his empire by not wasting either. That same morning, across town in a modest apartment complex with peeling paint and rusty railings, Mei Lin woke up with a start. She had overslept by 15 minutes, a disaster for someone who couldn't afford to be late. As a single mother working 2 jobs, every minute of her day was carefully allocated. "Lien. Time for school," she called to her 8-year-old daughter while hastily putting together a simple breakfast. Lien appeared, already dressed in her school uniform, her small backpack ready. "You were tired, Mama, so I got ready by myself," she said with a proud smile that momentarily eased the worry lines around May's eyes. "What would I do without you, little one?" May said, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Come, we must hurry." The bus ride across town was crowded, and May held Lien close as they swayed with the vehicle's movements. After dropping Lien at school with a tight hug and a promise to pick her up on time, May rushed to her first job at a busy downtown cafe not far from the financial district. By noon, Robert was in a foul mood. A major deal was on the verge of collapse because the other party was making unreasonable demands. His team sat in tense silence around the conference table as he drummed his fingers impatiently. "Find a solution or find new jobs," he finally said, standing up abruptly. "I'm going out for lunch. Have something workable when I return." The relief in the room was palpable as he left. One junior executive even loosened his tie, whispering, "Does that man have any feelings at all?" Robert heard the comment but didn't react. He had long since stopped caring what people thought of him. Feelings were liabilities in business, and he had eliminated his with surgical precision over the years. After picking up his usual salad from an exclusive restaurant that reserved his favorite table every day, Robert decided to walk back to his office. The streets were crowded with lunchtime workers, but as usual, people instinctively created a path for him. His phone rang. It was his ex-wife's lawyer, no doubt calling about more money despite their divorce settlement being more than generous. He silenced the call without answering, his irritation growing. He would need to have a word with his own legal team. These distractions were becoming tiresome. Just as Robert was about to cross the street back to his office building, Mei Lin was rushing from her cafe job to her second job as an office cleaner. She had exactly 20 minutes to get across several blocks, change into her uniform, and clock in. Being late would mean a warning, and 3 warnings meant termination, something she couldn't afford. May darted through the crowd, her worn shoulder bag bouncing against her hip. She glanced at her watch and quickened her pace even more, her mind racing through calculations of bills due and the medicine Lien needed for her asthma. Neither May nor Robert was looking when they collided at the corner. May's bag went flying, its contents spilling across the sidewalk. The impact caused her to instinctively reach out to steady herself, and without thinking, she grabbed onto Robert, her arms momentarily encircling him in what appeared to be a hug. For a split second, the busy street seemed to freeze. Robert stood rigid, completely taken aback by the unexpected physical contact. May, realizing what had happened, immediately stepped back, her face flushing with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't looking, I'm late for work," she stammered, dropping to her knees to gather her scattered belongings. People walked past, some staring, others pretending not to notice. Robert stood there, his expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. Then, to the surprise of onlookers, he knelt down and picked up a small, worn wallet that had landed near his feet. As he handed it back to May, their eyes met. There was something in her gaze, not just embarrassment or fear of his obvious wealth and status, but a genuine, deep-seated worry that struck a forgotten chord in him. "I apologize as well," he found himself saying, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "I wasn't paying attention." May looked stunned at his response. She had expected anger, perhaps even a threat to call security. "Thank you," she said softly, accepting the wallet. That's when Robert noticed the photo that had fallen out, a smiling little girl with the same warm eyes as the woman before him. Something about that image sent an unexpected pang through his chest. "Your daughter?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. May nodded, quickly tucking the photo back into her wallet. "Yes. I need to go, I'll be late," she paused, then added with unexpected boldness, "I really am sorry about bumping into you." "It's fine," Robert said, and for the first time in years, he meant it. He watched as she hurried away, disappearing into the crowd. The strange encounter lingered in his mind as he returned to his office. During the afternoon meeting, he found himself uncharacteristically distracted. The worried look in the woman's eyes kept returning to him, reminding him of something, or someone, from long ago. That evening, as Robert sat alone in his penthouse overlooking the city lights, he picked up a framed photo he usually ignored, his parents, humble shopkeepers who had worked endless hours to provide for him. They had died while he was climbing the corporate ladder, too busy to visit them more than once a year. Their proud smiles in the photo now seemed to hold a question he couldn't quite answer. Meanwhile, May made it to her second job just in time, though her supervisor gave her a warning look. She cleaned offices until late evening, her back aching and her mind replaying the strange encounter with the well-dressed businessman who had surprised her with his unexpected politeness. When she finally picked up Lien from the after-school program, her daughter could tell something was different. "What happened today, Mama? You look strange," Lien observed as they walked home. "I met someone unusual," May answered thoughtfully. "Sometimes people surprise you." That night, as May tucked Lien into bed in their small apartment, she found herself telling her daughter a story about kindness coming from unexpected places, inspired by her brief interaction with the businessman. Across town, Robert sat with his untouched glass of expensive whiskey, opening his laptop to check his emails. Yet instead of focusing on work, he found himself searching for local charities that helped single parents. The worried eyes of the woman from that afternoon had awakened something he had buried long ago, a memory of his mother working multiple jobs, that same worry etched on her face. For the first time in years, Robert Chen, the cold-hearted millionaire, felt something stir within him, something he had convinced himself was a weakness but now felt strangely like strength. Neither May nor Robert knew it yet, but that accidental hug on a busy street corner was about to change both their lives in ways they could never have imagined. 3 days had passed since the unexpected encounter, but Robert couldn't shake the memory of the woman's worried eyes. He sat in his corner office, overlooking the city he had conquered deal by deal, yet found himself distracted during an important presentation. "Mr. Chen? Should we proceed with the acquisition?" his CFO asked, breaking his thoughts. "What?" "Yes," Robert responded, straightening in his chair. "But first, I want the impact assessment on the employees. How many jobs will be affected?" The room fell silent. In 15 years, Robert Chen had never once asked about employees during an acquisition. His only concerns had always been profit margins and market share. "I'll have those numbers by end of day," the CFO replied, exchanging glances with the other executives. After the meeting, Robert's assistant approached cautiously. "Sir, you have a charity dinner tonight. The one your PR team insisted on." should I have your driver ready at 7? Robert had completely forgotten. Normally, he sent a check and skipped these functions, but tonight, something compelled him to go. Yes. And find out which local charities support single working parents. His assistant blinked in surprise but knew better than to question him. Across town, Mei Lin was facing a crisis. Lien's asthma had flared up badly, requiring an emergency visit to the clinic. The bill had depleted her small savings, and now her landlord was threatening eviction if she couldn't pay the overdue rent by the end of the week. Just 3 more days, please, she begged into her phone during her lunch break. I get paid on Friday. The landlord was unmoved. Rules are rules. 3 days, then out. I've been too lenient already. Mei hung up, fighting back tears as she returned to clearing tables at the cafe. Her co-worker, Jean, noticed her red eyes. Everything okay? Jean asked, helping her load the dishwasher. Mei rarely shared her problems, but today the weight felt too heavy to bear alone. Lien's medicine cost more than I expected. Now I might not make rent. Jean frowned sympathetically. You know, there's a charity dinner happening tonight at the Grand Hotel. My cousin works catering there. They always need extra hands for these events, and they pay cash same night. I could put in a word. Hope flickered in Mei's eyes. Would you? I can work after my cleaning shift. One phone call later, Mei had secured a spot serving at the charity gala. It would be exhausting after her 2 regular jobs, but the extra money might just save their home. That evening, Robert arrived at the Grand Hotel in his custom tuxedo. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the jewelry of the city's elite. He moved through the crowd mechanically, shaking hands and nodding at appropriate intervals while his mind remained elsewhere. The event honored local charities supporting underprivileged children, and the keynote speaker was the founder of a foundation providing medical assistance to families who couldn't afford care. As Robert listened to stories of parents working multiple jobs to afford their children's treatments, the image of Mei Lin and her daughter's photo burned in his mind. And now, we invite you all to enjoy dinner while considering your contributions, the host announced. Remember, every dollar makes a difference in these families' lives. The guests moved to their assigned tables, where white-gloved servers began delivering the first course. Robert was seated with other business leaders, engaging in the same superficial conversation he'd endured countless times before. In the kitchen, Mei hurriedly donned the server's uniform her new supervisor had provided. You'll be serving tables 7 through 9, the catering manager instructed. Remember, these people paid $10,000 per plate, so service must be impeccable. Mei nodded, carefully balancing the tray of appetizers. She'd never seen such elaborate food in her life, each tiny portion probably costing more than her daily grocery budget for Lien and herself. As she entered the ballroom, she was struck by the opulence. The flowers alone could have paid her rent for months. She kept her eyes down, focused on not spilling anything as she served the first table, then the second. When she approached table 8, a familiar voice made her freeze. The problem with most charities, the man was saying, is inefficiency. Too much overhead, not enough direct impact. Mei looked up and found herself staring directly at the businessman from the street corner. Recognition flashed in his eyes as well, followed by something that looked almost like embarrassment. You, Robert said quietly, cutting off his own conversation mid-sentence. The other executives at the table turned to look at Mei, who now stood mortified, tray trembling slightly in her hands. I'm sorry, sir, she managed, quickly placing his appetizer before him and serving the others, desperately trying to appear professional despite her racing heart. Robert watched her, noting the exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. Wait, he said as she was about to move to the next table. Your name. I never got your name. The others at the table were now openly staring at this unusual interaction. Mei, she answered softly. Mei Lin. Robert nodded, as if committing it to memory. Thank you, Mei Lin. She hurried away, face burning with a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. In the kitchen, she pressed her back against the wall, trying to calm her breathing. What were the chances? And why had he asked for her name? Throughout dinner, Robert found his attention repeatedly drawn to Mei as she moved efficiently between tables. He noticed how she smiled warmly at an elderly guest who thanked her, the genuine kindness in her expression so different from the artificial smiles surrounding him. During the dessert course, he overheard snippets of her conversation with another server. Just need to make it until Friday, she was saying quietly. The landlord won't wait any longer. How much do you need? The other server asked. 300 more. The medical bills took everything. Robert felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. $300, what he spent on a bottle of wine without a second thought, stood between this woman and homelessness for her and her child. When the charity auction began after dinner, Robert found himself bidding recklessly on items he had no interest in. A weekend at a vineyard, a signed sports jersey, a private cooking class, he won them all, writing checks that caused murmurs among the crowd. Chen must be trying to impress someone, he overheard someone whisper. Never seen him open his wallet like this before. By the end of the night, Robert had donated more than he had in the previous 5 years combined. But as the event wound down, he realized he hadn't seen Mei Lin in the past hour. Excuse me, he stopped another server. The woman serving our table earlier, is she still working? Mei? Her shift ended. She had to pick up her daughter from somewhere. Robert nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment he felt. He collected his auction items and headed toward the exit, where the valet was bringing his car around. That's when he spotted her across the street, huddled at a bus stop despite the late hour and light rain that had begun to fall. Without thinking, he crossed over. Mei Lin, he called, causing her to look up in surprise. May I offer you a ride home? She hesitated, clearly uncertain. That's very kind, but I need to pick up my daughter from my neighbor's place first. Of course, Robert said. We can pick her up, and then take you both home. Mei studied his face, searching for motive or danger, but found only sincerity, surprising from a man whose cold reputation preceded him in business circles. Why are you helping me? She asked directly. Robert considered the question. I'm not entirely sure, he admitted with unexpected honesty. Perhaps because no one has hugged me, even accidentally, in a very long time. The simple vulnerability in his statement caught Mei off guard. After a moment, she nodded. Thank you, then. I accept. The sleek Bentley attracted stares as it pulled up to Mei's humble apartment building 20 minutes later. Lien, sleepy but curious, held tightly to her mother's hand as they said goodnight to the strange man in the fancy car. Thank you again, Mei said. For the ride. It was nothing, Robert replied, then hesitated. May I ask, is everything all right? I couldn't help overhearing something about a landlord earlier. Mei stiffened, pride warring with desperation. We've had some challenges, but we'll manage. Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out his business card, handing it to her. If you need anything, a reference for work, perhaps, please call me. Mei took the card, recognizing that he was offering help in a way that preserved her dignity. Good night, Mr. Chen. As the Bentley pulled away, Robert found himself looking back at the apartment building with its peeling paint and broken security door. For the first time in years, he thought about his childhood home, not so different from where Mei and her daughter lived now. Back in his penthouse, Robert couldn't sleep. He paced the expansive living room, the charity auction items forgotten in a corner. $300 stood between Mei's family and eviction. Medical bills had taken their savings. The pieces fell into place, painting a picture of struggle he had once known intimately but had chosen to forget. He picked up his phone, pulled up his banking app, and made a decision that would set in motion changes neither he nor May could possibly anticipate. The next morning, May woke before her alarm, anxiety about the rent already churning in her stomach. She moved quietly around the small apartment, preparing Lien's breakfast and lunch without waking her. The money from last night's catering job had helped, but it still wasn't enough. As she was pouring a cup of tea, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Lin, this is Robert Chen. I hope I'm not disturbing you. There's a matter I'd like to discuss regarding a potential opportunity. Please call when convenient." May stared at the message in disbelief. How had he gotten her number? Then she remembered filling out her details on the catering agency's form. He must have connections there. After dropping Lien at school, May found a quiet corner outside the cafe before her shift and returned the call, her heart pounding. "Mr. Chen? This is Mei Lin. Thank you for calling back." Robert's voice sounded different somehow, less stern than she remembered. "I'll be direct. My company is implementing a new community outreach program, and we need someone to coordinate with local organizations. Based on our interactions, I believe you have the right perspective for this role." May was speechless. Was he offering her a job? The position pays 3 times minimum wage, with benefits including health insurance, he continued. It would require weekday hours only, leaving your evenings free. "Mr. Chen," May finally found her voice. "This is very unexpected. I don't have qualifications for corporate work. You have life experience, which is what this position requires," Robert replied. "Would you be willing to come to my office today to discuss it properly?" Across town, Robert hung up the phone and looked at the hastily created job description on his desk. His HR director had been confused but didn't question him when he demanded a new position be created by morning. The truth was, Robert hadn't slept all night. He kept seeing May's face, her dignity despite obvious struggles. Something about her reminded him of his mother, the same determined set of her jaw, the same selfless devotion to her child. He had initially considered simply paying her rent anonymously, but something told him Mei Lin wouldn't accept charity. She needed opportunity, not handouts. And strangely enough, he found himself wanting to see her again. At noon, May arrived at Chen Investments, feeling completely out of place in her best clothes, a simple blouse and slacks that paled in comparison to the designer outfits worn by everyone else in the gleaming lobby. "Ms. Lin from Mr. Chen," she told the receptionist, who looked her up and down with barely concealed surprise before directing her to the executive elevator. Robert's assistant led her into his office, a vast space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Robert stood to greet her, oddly nervous in a way his board members would never have believed possible. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Mr. Chen," May began, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I appreciate this opportunity, but I need to understand why you're offering it to me specifically. We've only met twice, under unusual circumstances." Robert appreciated her directness. "Do you believe in moments that change your perspective? That make you question the path you've been on?" She nodded slowly. "When you accidentally embraced me on that street corner, it was the first genuine human contact I'd experienced in years." The admission seemed to surprise even him. "It made me realize how isolated I've become, how disconnected from the real world and real problems." He handed her a folder containing the job description. "This position is real, with real responsibilities. You would be the bridge between my company and the community. I believe you can do it, but if you're not interested, I understand." May opened the folder, her eyes widening at the salary figure. This would change everything for Lien and her, no more choosing between medicine and rent, no more exhausting triple shifts. "Why me?" she asked again, still suspicious. Robert considered lying, giving her some corporate explanation. Instead, he chose honesty. "Because you remind me of where I came from, before I became this." He gestured to his expensive surroundings. I used to know what it meant to struggle, to put someone else's needs before my own. I've lost that, and I think it's made me a lesser person. The vulnerability in his admission stunned May. The man before her seemed nothing like the cold-hearted millionaire described in business magazines. I'll need to think about it, she finally said. This would be a big change. Of course, Robert nodded. Take the weekend. The position is yours if you want it. As May left the building, clutching the folder to her chest, her phone buzzed with a text from her landlord, final warning. Rent due by 5 p.m. today or eviction proceedings begin Monday. She looked back at the towering skyscraper of Chen Investments, wondering if fate had truly brought them together, or if she was making a deal with the devil. Either way, she knew her decision would change everything. May stood outside Chen Investments, torn between suspicion and desperate hope. The job offer seemed too good to be true, yet the sincerity in Robert's eyes had felt genuine. With her landlord's deadline looming, she made a decision and pulled out her phone. Mr. Chen? I'd like to accept the position, she said when he answered. But I have one condition: I start immediately, today, and receive an advance on my first paycheck. There was a pause on the other end. Done. Come back up to my office. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, May had signed an employment contract, received an advance, and paid her landlord in full. For the first time in months, she picked Lian up from school without the weight of financial anxiety crushing her shoulders. Why are you smiling so much, Mama? Lian asked as they walked home. Because things are going to be different now, May answered, squeezing her daughter's hand. I have a new job that means I'll be home every evening with you. Lian's eyes widened. No more night job? Promise? Promise, May said, her heart swelling at her daughter's joy. Meanwhile, Robert sat alone in his office long after everyone else had gone home. He'd instructed HR to prepare onboarding materials for May's first official day on Monday and had his assistant clear his schedule to personally train her. His behavior had raised eyebrows throughout the company, but no one dared question him directly. He pulled up his calendar and stared at an entry for Sunday, his monthly visit to Cherry Blossom Nursing Home. It was a duty he had performed mechanically for years, spending exactly 1 hour there before leaving with relief. This time, something made him pause and add a note: bring flowers. The weekend passed quickly, and Monday morning arrived with nervous energy for both May and Robert. May dressed carefully in new clothes she'd purchased with part of her advance, professional but modest. Lian had helped her choose, proud of her mother's new job, in a big building with important people. When May arrived at Chen Investments, she was surprised to find Robert waiting for her in the lobby rather than sending an assistant. Good morning, he said, leading her to the elevator. I thought I'd show you around myself today. As they rode up, May noticed something different about him. His usual stern expression had softened, and he'd traded his typical dark suit for navy blue. The office he led her to wasn't what she expected. Rather than some windowless room tucked away from view, it was a spacious corner office with a view nearly as impressive as his own. This will be yours, he said, watching her reaction carefully. The community liaison should have presence and authority. May walked to the window, momentarily overwhelmed. It's too much. It's exactly what the position requires, Robert countered. Your first task will be reviewing these. He pointed to a stack of proposals from local charities seeking corporate funding. I want your perspective on which would create the most meaningful impact. As the day progressed, May discovered that Robert truly valued her opinions. When she suggested that a children's asthma clinic would benefit many families like hers, he immediately approved a substantial donation. When she mentioned that the after-school program Lian attended needed repairs, he asked for a detailed proposal. By lunchtime, rumors were circulating throughout the company. Who was this woman who had the ear of the untouchable Robert Chen? What power did she hold over him to make him smile, actually smile, during a budget meeting. Robert was aware of the whispers but found himself unconcerned. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond profit margins. "Would you join me for lunch?" he asked May as noon approached. "There's a cafe nearby with decent food." As they walked through the financial district, Robert noticed how different it felt with May beside him. People still moved out of his way, but now some nodded curiously at his companion. "Tell me about your daughter," he said as they sat with their meals. May's face lit up immediately. "Lien is everything to me. She's 8, smarter than I'll ever be, and has such a kind heart despite all our struggles." "She sounds remarkable," Robert said, thinking of the photograph he'd seen that first day. "That must be difficult, raising her alone." "It is," May admitted. "But seeing her grow makes everything worthwhile." As she spoke about Lien's achievements in school despite their challenging circumstances, Robert realized something uncomfortable. He had spent decades building wealth but had no one to share it with. No family, no close friends, not even a pet. "Would you and Lien?" He began hesitantly, surprising himself with the question forming on his lips. "Would you both join me for dinner this weekend? I know a place with excellent ice cream for dessert." The invitation hung in the air between them, representing far more than a simple meal. For Robert, it was a step towards something he'd denied himself for years: human connection. For May, it was both promising and frightening, the beginning of something unpredictable involving her most precious treasure, her daughter. "Mama, is this a date?" Lien asked innocently as May helped her into a pretty dress on Saturday evening. May nearly dropped the hairbrush she was holding. "No, sweetie. Mr. Chen is my boss. This is just a friendly dinner." "But you look so pretty," Lien observed, watching her mother apply a touch of makeup, something May rarely bothered with. "And you're wearing your special necklace from Grandma." May touched the simple jade pendant at her throat, a family heirloom and her only valuable possession. "I just want to look professional, that's all." But as she checked her reflection one last time, May couldn't deny the flutter of nervousness in her stomach that had nothing to do with professional concerns. In just 1 week, Robert Chen had transformed from the cold-hearted millionaire of business legends into someone different. Someone who listened when she spoke, who seemed genuinely interested in her opinions, who had given her daughter hope for a better future. When the doorbell rang, Lien raced to answer it while May hurried behind. "Are you Mr. Chen?" Lien asked boldly, looking up at the tall man in the hallway. Robert stood awkwardly holding a small gift bag and a bouquet of flowers. Gone was the imposing executive in a tailored suit. Instead, he wore casual slacks and a blue button-down shirt that softened his usually severe appearance. "I am," he answered, kneeling to meet Lien at eye level. "And you must be Lien. Your mother talks about you all the time." He offered her the gift bag. "I thought you might like this." Lien peeked inside and gasped, pulling out a beautiful illustrated book about space, a subject she had become fascinated with at school. "How did you know?" she asked in wonder. "Your mother mentioned you wanted to be an astronaut," Robert replied with a small smile. May watched this exchange from the doorway, surprised by Robert's thoughtfulness. He had remembered such a small detail from their conversations. "These are for you," he said, standing to hand May the flowers, not extravagant roses, but cheerful daisies that somehow seemed more meaningful. "Thank you," she said softly, touched by his consideration. "Please come in for a moment while I put these in water." Robert stepped into their small apartment, seeing for the first time the home May had created despite limited means. Though the furniture was worn, everything was spotlessly clean. Drawings by Lien decorated the refrigerator, and shelves held carefully arranged second-hand books. It was modest but filled with more warmth than his expansive penthouse had ever known. "Your home is lovely," he said sincerely. May looked up from arranging the flowers, surprised by his comment. She had expected him to find their apartment shabby compared to his wealth. Dinner was at a family-owned Chinese restaurant rather than the expensive establishment May had anticipated. The elderly owner greeted Robert by name, leading them to a quiet corner table. "You come here often?" May asked, surprised. "My parents brought me here as a child," Robert explained, a hint of melancholy in his voice. "It's one of the few places that hasn't changed." Throughout dinner, May observed how different Robert was outside the office. He listened patiently to Lien's excited chatter about school and space, asking questions that made the child beam with importance. With May, he shared stories of his own childhood, something he had never discussed with anyone at the company. "My father owned a small electronics repair shop," he revealed as they enjoyed dessert. "He worked 16-hour days, determined that I would have opportunities he never had." "Is that why you became successful?" Lien asked, chocolate ice cream smudged on her cheek. Robert's expression turned reflective. "Yes, but somewhere along the way, I forgot why it mattered. I wanted to make my parents proud, but I think..." He paused. "I think they would have been prouder if I'd remembered what they valued most, people, not profits." May reached across the table without thinking, briefly touching his hand. "It's never too late to remember." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition of two souls who had each been lonely in different ways. After dinner, Robert insisted on driving them home despite May's protests that they could take the bus. As they approached her apartment building, May noticed a crowd gathered outside and flashing emergency lights. "What's happening?" she asked, suddenly anxious. As they got closer, the acrid smell of smoke filled the air. A firefighter approached their car. "You folks live here?" "There was an electrical fire on the 3rd floor. Building's not safe to enter tonight." May felt the blood drain from her face. "That's our floor," she whispered, clutching Lien's hand tightly. In that moment of crisis, Robert made a decision that would further change all their lives. "You'll stay with me tonight," he said firmly. "Both of you." Looking at the smoke billowing from what had been their home, May nodded numbly, too shocked to argue. As they drove away toward Robert's penthouse, none of them realized that fate had just pushed them closer together in ways they couldn't have imagined. May stood in the center of Robert's penthouse, her hand still holding Lien's tightly as they both stared wide-eyed at the luxury surrounding them. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering city below, and modern artwork adorned walls that could have housed their entire apartment several times over. "You live here alone?" Lien asked, breaking the stunned silence. Robert nodded, suddenly seeing his home through their eyes, impressive but cold, like a museum rather than a living space. No children's drawings on the refrigerator. No well-loved books on the shelves. Nothing that spoke of human connection. "The guest rooms are this way," he said, leading them down a hallway. "I'll find something for you both to sleep in." As Robert rummaged through his closet for t-shirts they could use as nightgowns, he heard Lien's excited voice echoing through the penthouse, asking May questions about everything she saw. The sound of a child's wonder in his home stirred something long dormant within him. After getting them settled, Robert retreated to his home office, making calls to find out more about the fire and what was being done for the displaced residents. When he returned to the living room, he found May staring out at the city lights, arms wrapped around herself. "The fire department confirmed it was electrical," he said gently. "Faulty wiring in the walls. They don't know yet when residents can return, but..." He hesitated. "From what they described, there's significant water and smoke damage to your unit." May closed her eyes, absorbing this new blow. "Everything we have is there. I've arranged for someone to assess what can be salvaged once they allow access," Robert said. "And I've spoken to the building manager about temporary housing for all affected residents." "You didn't have to do that," May said, turning to face him. "Not for everyone." "I know," Robert replied simply. "But it seemed like the right thing." The vulnerability in her eyes made his chest tighten. This woman who had accidentally embraced him on a street corner was now bringing feelings back to life he'd thought long extinct. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for tonight, but for everything this past week. You've changed our lives." "You've changed mine too," Robert admitted, the words coming easier than he expected. "For years, I've defined success by numbers on spreadsheets. This week, I've remembered there are more important measurements." The next morning, Lien woke them both by bouncing excitedly through the penthouse, having discovered Robert's rarely used kitchen. "Can we make pancakes?" she asked, her earlier shyness completely vanished. "I know how to help." To May's surprise, Robert rolled up his sleeves and joined them, following Lien's enthusiastic instructions with remarkable patience. Soon, the kitchen was filled with laughter and the smell of slightly burned pancakes, the first real breakfast Robert had made in his home in years. As they ate, Robert's phone rang. It was his assistant, reminding him about his monthly nursing home visit. "I completely forgot," he said, looking at the time. "I need to go, but please, stay as long as you need. Make yourselves at home." May saw his genuine concern. "We'll be fine. Go do what you need to do." Robert hesitated, then asked, "Would you both like to come with me? It's not exciting, just visiting an old family friend, but afterward we could check on your apartment." An hour later, they arrived at Cherry Blossom Nursing Home, Robert carrying flowers and a box of pastries. May noticed how the staff greeted him with surprised warmth, commenting on his lovely family, a misunderstanding neither of them corrected. They followed him to a sunny room where an elderly woman sat in a wheelchair by the window. Her face lit up when she saw Robert, but her eyes widened with curiosity at the sight of May and Lien. "Auntie Wu," Robert said, leaning down to embrace her. "I've brought some friends today." "Friends?" the old woman repeated, her eyes twinkling. "Or family? You never mentioned a wife and daughter, Robert." Robert blushed, a sight May would never have imagined possible. "This is Mei Lin and her daughter Lien. May works with me now." "Ah," Auntie Wu said knowingly. "And how did you meet?" "She hugged me," Robert answered with unexpected honesty, "and woke me up." The old woman laughed delightedly, reaching for May's hand. "Then she's done what I've been trying to do for years. Come, sit and tell me everything." As Robert watched May and Lien charming Auntie Wu with their warmth and genuine interest, he realized something profound. The lonely path he'd chosen after his parents' deaths, focusing solely on building wealth and power, had been a mistake. True wealth was sitting before him now, in the connections between people who cared for each other. When it was time to leave, Auntie Wu held his hand tightly. "Don't let this one go, Robert," she whispered. "I see how you look at her." Robert didn't deny it. For the first time in decades, he was beginning to hope for something more meaningful than business success. But as they drove to check on May's apartment, uncertainty clouded his thoughts. Would she want a place in his life beyond their working relationship? And was he capable of being the man she and Lien deserved? 3 weeks had passed since the fire. May and Lien had moved into a temporary apartment provided by Robert's company while their building underwent repairs. Though Robert had offered his guest rooms indefinitely, May had gently declined, needing space to process the whirlwind changes in her life. At Chin Investments, rumors about their relationship had evolved from scandalous whispers to genuine curiosity. The once feared CEO now held regular meetings with community organizations, approved generous funding for local programs, and even remembered employees' birthdays. The transformation was remarkable and rippled throughout the company culture. "The quarterly reports are ready for your review," his assistant said, placing a folder on Robert's desk. "Thank you," he replied, actually looking up from his computer. "And how is your mother's recovery going?" The assistant blinked in surprise. 6 months ago, she would have bet her salary that Robert Chen didn't even know she had a mother, let alone that she'd been ill. "Much better, sir. Thank you for asking." After she left, Robert opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was his mother's jade pendant, similar to the one May treasured but more ornate. He'd retrieved it from his safe deposit box days ago but hadn't found the courage to move forward with what it represented. Across town, May sat in a cafe with her friend Jean, who couldn't believe the changes in May's circumstances. So the Ice King of Finance isn't so frozen after all, Jean marveled. And he's really good with Lien? May nodded, a smile softening her features. You should see them together. He's teaching her chess, and she's teaching him how to make paper airplanes. It's like he's discovering childhood for the first time. And what about you? Jean asked, studying her friend's face. How do you feel about him? May stared into her teacup. Confused. Grateful. Scared. She looked up at Jean. He's become important to us both, but everything's happened so fast. What if this isn't real? What if he wakes up one day and decides playing family with us was just a phase? Has he given you any reason to doubt him? No, May admitted. Every promise he's made, he's kept. Every day, he seems more genuine, more himself. Then maybe, Jean suggested gently, the question isn't whether to trust him, but whether you're brave enough to trust your own heart. That evening, Robert paced his penthouse, rehearsing words that still didn't feel adequate. The business deals worth billions had never made him this nervous. His phone buzzed with a text from May, asking if they were still meeting at the community garden project as planned. He replied yes, his heart racing as he slipped the velvet box into his pocket. The garden had been May's idea, transforming an empty lot near her old apartment building into a green space where children could play and families could grow vegetables. Robert had not only funded it but had rolled up his sleeves alongside community volunteers to help build it. When he arrived, he found May kneeling beside Lien, helping her plant sunflower seeds along the fence. The sight of them, heads bent together, hands working in the soil, made his chest tighten with longing for what he'd never known he wanted. Robert. Lien called, spotting him first. Come see what we planted. As he joined them, kneeling in the dirt despite his expensive clothes, May noticed the change in him. The severe lines of his face had softened. The coldness that had once defined him had melted away, revealing the man who had always existed beneath the armor of success. I have something to show you both, he said, suddenly serious. Something important. He led them to a bench beneath a newly planted cherry tree, taking a deep breath before speaking. When I was very young, my father told me a story about how he met my mother, Robert began. He said he was a serious, focused young man with no time for distractions. Then one day, a woman bumped into him at the market, apologized with a smile, and changed his life forever. He looked at May meaningfully. He said it was as if he'd been sleeping until that moment. May's eyes widened at the parallel. A few weeks ago, a woman accidentally hugged me on a street corner, Robert continued, his voice thick with emotion. And just like my father, I woke up. He took May's hand gently. I've been thinking about fate, about second chances. My parents built a good life not because of wealth, but because they had each other. I lost sight of that for a long time. From his pocket, he pulled out the velvet box and opened it. This was my mother's. Before she died, she made me promise I would give it only to someone who brought me true happiness. Tears filled May's eyes as she looked from the pendant to Robert's face. We don't have to rush, he said softly. I just want you both to know that you've changed me, healed me. Whether as friends or something more. I want to be part of your lives, if you'll have me. Lien, who had been watching intently, suddenly wrapped her arms around both of them. Like a family? She asked hopefully. Robert looked at May, waiting for her answer. With tears shining in her eyes, May reached out and closed the distance between them, embracing him not by accident this time, but by choice. Yes, she whispered against his shoulder. Like a family. And in that moment, beneath a young cherry tree in a garden built by community, the man once known as the cold-hearted millionaire found the warmth he had denied himself for far too long, all because of an accidental hug that had changed everything.